Hey guys, it's Joshua. So good to see ya. I hope everyone is having a good time. It's been a very busy few weeks, so I apologize for not getting a video out, but I have a special video today. I'm going to be taking you guys on kind of a run through of me opening my latest import order, as well as discussing 5 different kind of tips and strategies that I have for growing the best Monstera. My import order was unfortunately inspected and opened by the US Customs and Border Protection, so hopefully everything made it in here. Occasionally, if they see a plant that doesn't look very good or has pests or anything that isn't allowed into the country, they will remove all of it and inspect the rest. The box still feels quite heavy, so I think everything should be in here, but we will see very soon. So a lot of the things that I'm going to be discussing today while I unbox are going to be specifically geared towards indoor growing. For example, one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is going to be related to airflow, and if you're growing in a greenhouse or you're growing in, outdoors, that isn't really something that you have to worry about. So if you're growing Monstera inside or potentially thinking about growing Monstera inside, this is going to be the video for you. Alrighty, so the first thing that we are going to discuss today with Monstera growing, and my first tip is going to be to be consistent with your watering schedule. One recommendation that I have for growers, ooh, this is nice, look at that. Sphinx mint. A lot of the times with the new plants, Monstera especially, they take a while to get used to your growing style. For example, for me, I like to use a much more kind of moisture retentive mix, so I use a lot of soils, and that's simply because my plants dry out very quick and I like to keep them a bit more on the root bound side. So for me, I like to leave them in a mix that is more moisture retentive so that I don't have to water them so often. What's interesting about that is that Monstera does very well in that kind of mix. They do just fine in either something that is super moisture retentive or much more airy, but of course you have to adapt based on the soil that you're planting in. Watering more often with something more chunky, and watering less often or being more cognizant when it comes to a more moisture retentive mix. So for someone who, just got a Monstera, for example, one of these beautiful imported plants, I'm just going to show you guys, it's beautiful. When you're planting it, you want to make sure that you're consistent with your watering, and if you're using a certain mix, you want to make sure that you're watering specifically to that mix. Monstera can get confused. The plant might be pushing out new roots to kind of grow in a certain way. For example, if you're watering more often, your Monstera is going to start to shift and produce roots that are more kind of suited or acclimated to being more wet. So if you change your mind and you start growing them, dry, not only is your Monstera going to get confused, but the roots might suffer because of it, because your plant is basically trying to adapt to the environment, that it's in. And if you're constantly changing that, your Monstera can get stressed out. You might get root rot, you might get dry rot, which is the worst thing ever. Just be cognizant of however you're growing, stick with it. If your plant looks fine, if your roots look fine, don't change things up too much. Otherwise, you might get slower growth. You may get issues with rot. And yeah, no one wants this. Holy shit, look at that. A big root ball. This is one of the cool hyperfenestrated forms this is a baby of it. I can show you guys the mama pic soon. Really excited for this one. Woo-hoo. The second tip that I have, this is specifically kind of oriented towards aesthetics, is if you're growing indoors and you're growing under lights and you have that opportunity to manipulate and change the direction of the lights, if you want your Monsteras to face all in one way, or you want the leaves to look more organized, I highly recommend to place the lights in the direction that you want your plant to grow, because these are phototropic, because Monstera will face their leaves towards wherever the light source is. If you want them all to be in a certain direction, or you want them all to face the same way, put your light either in front of your plant horizontally or slightly above vertically. If you place your lights above, like for example here, your leaves are going to be facing more upwards. Some people, like myself, don't quite like that because the leaves aren't facing forwards. When you're looking at your plants, you know, they're not all going to be, you know, nice and smiling towards you. They're going to be facing up. So for me, what I do is I actually take my lights and I put them towards the front side of my shelf. And in addition, I also have this LED bulb here as well that is not on right now. But when it is on, it faces forward so that the plants are going to grow towards the front. And that just makes a much nicer display because your leaves are going to be facing the direction that you want to see them in. They're not just going to be upwards. So not only does that affect kind of the aesthetics of the plant, but it also kind of makes them easier to handle because when all of your light is concentrated towards the front, your leaves are going to be growing a bit closer together because they're all going to be pushing towards the same direction. That makes it easier to cram a bunch of monsteras like what I do here. So yeah, not only is it good for aesthetics and how they look, it's also good for space too. If you're, you know, short on space like I am and you want to have a big collection, but having, you know, a lot of space is not a feasible option. Oh my gosh, y'all. This one is huge. I have to pull it out. Oh my god. It's a mint no ID, by the way. It's giant. Oh my god. I haven't seen one this big in forever. If you guys remember the post on my Instagram with that giant half moon mint, that one did get sold. I'll put a picture of it up here so that you guys can see. But this was pretty darn big too. I have been looking for a big mint no ID ever since I bought that half moon one because it was just beautiful. I do miss it. And now I seem to have another one on my hands. It did not look this big in the picture. Yeah. Mint no ID. I'm crazy. I don't know what's wrong with me. I keep buying big plants and I don't have space for any of this stuff. But I'll make it work. Look, it's beautiful. Yeah, anyway, here's another mint no ID. I should take another one of those pictures where I'm holding it up because it's so big, but yeah, here's another crazy day in the world of Josh. I'm a mess. This next tip is very important, especially for people growing indoors. Airflow is something that I feel is not super talked about with Monstera, mostly because they don't really need much of it. You know, in nature where they grow, they get tons of airflow outdoors. But when you're growing inside, you run into issues of stagnant air, not getting enough airflow. And airflow, I find, has been really important, especially with growing variegated Monstera. So a lot of the times issues with arias, with browning, with, you know, really quick kind of crisping of the leaves, they can be alleviated with high airflow. I'm not exactly sure the exact science of it, but I have a feeling that stagnant air, moisture around the variegated parts of the aria is what causes them to brown really quickly. So if you have constantly moving air, you know, lots of airflow, you don't get that issue with any sort of stagnancy. And the variegated parts actually tend to stay more intact for longer. They will eventually brown at some point, but they don't seem to brown as fast as when they're in good airflow. So if you're kind of thinking about how to reduce browning of your variegation, if you want your plants to look more beautiful for longer, I highly recommend good airflow. Not only that, but it helps to reduce issues with, you know, pests and fungal infections. A lot of the times if you have issues with rust, for example, which is very common with Monstera, if you have good airflow, it prevents the little, I want to say spores or little flecks of the fungus, you know, from spreading, landing on your leaf and proliferating. So yeah, good airflow is not just good for browning and variegation, but also for maintaining, you know, good healthy leaves that don't have any pests, that don't have any issues with fungus. I'm so excited for this one. I ordered this one in for a customer of mine here in the USA. Woo! So maybe he will get to see this on YouTube before he actually gets to see the plant in person. But I was able to find this really beautiful half moon mint no ID overseas. It is beautiful and really, really crisp lines. Yeah, so excited for him to get this. I've really been a big fan recently of more sectoral specimens because I feel like they're harder to find nowadays. A lot of the times you get really nice marble color, evenly distributed color, but having nice sections, especially as clean as this with the half moon, much more of a rarity these days, funny enough, since I feel like most of what we see with sport findings and like the earlier albos that were being sold on like eBay, a lot of them were more on the kind of sectoral side, and nowadays we're seeing a lot more of that overall kind of even minty color, which is good because with albos, you know, if they're more evenly distributed, you get less browning. But there is something just really appealing about this pattern, so I'm excited for him to get this. Ed, if you see this, this is your plant looking really, really nice. This next tip, I'm not really sure if it's super essential to growing variegated monstera. It's something that a lot of people have discussed before, but no one has really done an exact kind of scientific, like this product will help you with variegation. But one thing that I like to use for all of my monsteras while I'm growing is silica. I use it in my watering. I'll occasionally use it as a foliar spray because it can be absorbed through the leaves as well. But I find that silica does really well with my monsteras. It helps them to have thicker cell walls, and so you get really nice thick stems. Your leaves are thicker, everything just gets a boost because you just have a more robust plant. Will grow faster and also has a nice benefit for pest prevention. So if the cells of your plant are thicker, you know, if your monstera stems are thicker and stronger, pests are going to have a much harder time kind of eating at it. And it also helps with the drought as well because the structure of the plant is much more strong. If you forget to water for a few days, you know, the stems will be strong compared to one that hasn't had silica. You won't really get as much bending with underwatered plants. You just get a much stronger plant that is more resilient to stress. And I find that's really good with variegated plants as well because it also helps with variegation. So if all of the cells are nice and strengthened and thick, you are less likely to get browning. I'm not going to say you won't get browning because it's inevitable, right? These cells don't have chlorophyll, so you're not necessarily going to have a bulletproof plant. But in terms of longevity and being able to enjoy that variegation, I think that it's a good additive to use. I just use a half strength every other watering or so with my watering, and then I'll foliar spray maybe once or twice a month. Just kind of depends on how I'm feeling. I use more of it during the growing season when my plants are growing really quick. Less so in the winter, but yeah, good additive to use. So my kind of tips for variegation are that and good airflow. Those I have found to be very good for keeping my variegated plants nice and, well, variegated. This order that I placed this week is really heavy on mints. I've really just been enjoying mints a lot, especially large form mints. A lot of the ones I've been posting on kind of Instagram lately are, well, large form mints. And I just think that they're really fascinating. They're not as consistent when it comes to like a mint no ID in terms of the color, since they can fade over time, but it is fun to kind of see them evolve and grow. I think the uncertainty of it is really exciting too. So yeah, here's another mint no ID. I have my exporter cut off any parts that are not good for the plant, so this one has a few holes because it did have some issues, likely with fungal infection, which tends to be kind of common in higher humidity where I'm importing from. But yeah, still really cute. This tip specifically is for people who are growing their monstera in semi-hydro, specifically pon. There's been a lot of growers who have started growing in pon, I myself included. I've been growing my monstera in pon for a while, but I've just been really enjoying growing in semi-hydro because there's not much thought that you have to put in it. Monstera tends to grow very well in pon as well. So it's just really good if you're the kind of person like me where either you forget to water sometimes or you're going on trips often and not always home. So yeah, I highly recommend pon, but one thing specifically about pon with monstera is that oftentimes the pon can be a little too dense. Pon is very heavy. If you've ever had a plant in pon, you'll know that sometimes those pots, and especially the bag that you buy in pon is oftentimes super heavy. And so that kind of translates to the growing as well, because sometimes Monstera roots will have issues kind of digging into the pon, if that makes sense. Not only is it dense, but it's very kind of moisture retaining. And so you may have issues with your plant staying a bit too wet. So specifically with pon, I recommend cutting it with some perlite if you want. Since Monstera tends to grow very well in perlite and very well in pon, but pon often stays a bit too wet. What I've seen some other growers recently do, I myself included, and that is to take some chunky perlite and cut it into your pon. So I sometimes will use a mix of around 50% pon, 50% perlite. You can do like a 3-4 ratio of perlite to pon. Just kind of breaking up that structure and making it not so dense and fine. The two main reasons I really like using pon and perlite together is A, the Monstera roots tend to grow a bit better because it's not so dense, especially for your more mature Monsteras where your roots are literally like a centimeter thick. Sometimes they do have a hard time pushing through the pon, so it just helps to break it up a bit more. And B, it helps it to not be so moisture retentive, which is sometimes an issue with Monstera, sometimes not. I've noticed some deliciosas have more issues with pon than others, so you kind of have to read your plant, but I think it's just a safe bet to put more perlite into your pon because it helps to keep everything aerative. It helps to not stay so wet, so you won't have as many issues with rot, and yeah, it's just a good choice. I have finished unboxing my order. There's another box that I actually have to do that is going to arrive tomorrow, but this is all that I have for today, and those are kind of the big main tips that I have for growing Monstera indoors. Hopefully you guys learned a thing or two, or maybe I introduced you to a new kind of growing technique. If you guys enjoyed the content, of course, you feel free to like and subscribe and take a look at some of my other videos. I love doing videos kind of discussing my care and what I like to do with my Monstera, in addition to all of the collection tours and showing off new specimens. So yeah, stay tuned for more stuff. Hopefully once the weather warms up, I can start to do a bit more specific care videos. So yeah, I'll see you guys later.